Do you think the state of MedTech in cybersecurity is improving at all, or are we getting worse?
Yeah, no, I think it's improving. So like, here's how I look at it.
What do you think, Trevor, about the industry and cybersecurity?
And so I would hope that it's a little bit more well-structured than some of these other situations, which we've seen come up in similar cases in the past. But
What do you mean a new bubble? What does that mean?
There's got to be, and again, these are part of like larger macro issues. I don't have an answer, but like, I'll give you an example, like on the capital side.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Today we have a guest, Omar. He's going to talk to us about the state of MedTech, and he's been doing quite a few podcasts. I don't know what episode number you're on, but you've interviewed and talked to a lot of people in the industry, haven't you, Omar?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you guys have been on the show before with when we did a webinar together, and then we have your episode coming out soon. But yeah, I think we're 330. It's in the 300s right now.
All right. So you've got a pretty good pulse after 300 and something discussions with people in MedTech. So it'd be interesting to see how you feel the industry has shifted over the years. And we'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity as well, because I know we talked about that in the past. And I'm Christian Espinoza, the co-host. I'm here joining with Trevor, our co-host. And I think you two are coming to us from, NorCal and SoCal. Is that right?
That's right. I'm in SoCal. I didn't know Trevor's in NorCal now. I thought Charles like the international man of mystery. He's always like somewhere in the world. So
yeah, I'm settling down for a few more hours here, actually, even in San Francisco, and then back on the road again. But
amazing.
I do have an apartment here that is now becoming an expensive storage unit. But yeah,
very small.
That is
apartment.
Probably the world's most expensive storage unit for sure. I would change that quickly, or just move to the East Bay. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's hard to beat the San Francisco just closeness of everything. But yeah, I figure I got to spend a little bit more time here to actually enjoy the closeness of everything.
Awesome. Why don't we start off, Omar, but you can maybe introduce yourself and give a little bit of background about what you do and what your organization does, and we can go from there.
Yeah, wonderful. And again, thanks for having me on the show. It's an honor to be on. You guys have a fantastic show, and more importantly, like I love podcasts that have like a very specific niche. You guys have a very nice like focus on technology and cybersecurity. So what do I do? So I've been in the industry a little over 15 years, started off in medical school before I transitioned into surgical robotics as a sales guy, moved into marketing, and as they say, the rest is history. And a few years ago, I decided to start my own business. It started off with me selling like online courses because I just didn't want to deal with anybody. I literally wanted to make Wi-Fi money and just like, sell a product and not deal with anybody. But then over time I was like, yeah, I'm really good at marketing and market engineering. And so started my own firm. So our company is MarketCraft. Our whole focus is on essentially, the whole idea behind market engineering. So a lot of people know about what it takes or what it looks like to create a category. But in order for that to actually work, you have to be able to engineer a market, or in our case, craft a market, so you can drive adoption, raise awareness with investors, and even leverage strategics for a buyout. And so we work with a lot of early stage companies, anywhere from like pre-FDA, pre-commercial, all the way through like commercial. We don't necessarily work with strategics, but in our product roadmap, I think for every small business, especially if you're service oriented, at some point you're going to end up working with like large strategics in the future. And what people know me for, they don't really know me for MarketCraft. What they know me, which is going to change. We just went through a name change. Now we're MarketCraft away from Khateeb & Co. So it'll be a lot of like really great thought leadership content produced on that end, so that people know like what we do and more importantly how they can spend money with us. But what everybody knows me for is really State of MedTech, the podcast. And so with that show, I interview investors, CEOs, industry experts like yourselves, and, really just to have a pulse on the industry. And so as a result of that, like, I guess like I'm one of the few people in the space who really has a true pulse on things, because I'm talking to so many different people, from investors and CEOs down to like even like salespeople.
Awesome. So what is the pulse on MedTech? Are we getting better, getting worse, or like, yeah, what is the pulse? What would you say?
Yeah. So like,
It's
we're
kind of a hard
recording this.
question to answer, though, right?
No, not a hard question at all. Hey, look,
Okay.
as a host of a show called The State of MedTech, I should be able to like articulate what the state of MedTech is.
Okay.
So if you kind of look at it, if the last few years was about consolidation in an industry, right? So very few strategics. So if you look at the strategics in our industry, you have 7 of them, and I'm going to list them out. So the 7 strategics were essentially Abbott, Edwards, Boston Scientific, Stryker, Siemens, J&J MedTech, and Intuitive. Of course, I can't forget Intuitive. And so the state of the industry for the longest time was essentially that, these companies could kind of sit back and see how things go in the market. They didn't really have to have this like really aggressive M&A approach. Boston, I think, is the most active buyer, and they do a really good job of that. But the problem with that is that over the last few years, while a lot of consolidation was happening, there wasn't a lot of competition in the market, and so exits were depressed. As a result of that, venture capital became a lot more strained. Venture as a whole across all industries, not just medtech, was a really poor performing asset over the last few years. And so for LPs, they put a lot of pressure on their VCs. And now VCs these days, whether you're in medtech or tech or anything else, are really looking at like revenue generating companies, which is great. I mean, you can essentially hire a monkey to like look at a company making money and say, oh yeah, we should invest in that. But then that sort of leaves this weird like no man's land for like early stage companies, right? Especially in our industry. Well, that's what happened the last few years. So what's happening this year? This year's kind of being defined by this theme of focus, right? So if you look at it, like a lot of these strategics are just spinning out somewhat profitable or not so profitable divisions of theirs, like and really getting focused on things like something that I think is super interesting is like Stryker. They have in development a robotic spine platform, but they spun out their entire spine division. They sold it to the Fisioglyph brothers, which is essentially a PE firm. You have companies like 3M. They spun out Solventum. The more famous one is J&J spinning out DePuy. And so what does this all mean? Well, what's interesting about that is, I wrote an article a few weeks ago. I got back to writing, and I wrote this article about the birth of the mini strategics. And I try and define it. It's kind of a loose term. Company that has anywhere from 2 billion to 15 billion in market cap is essentially this mini strategic. So DePuy is a great example. DePuy is the orthopedic division of J&J. It's about a $9-10 billion market cap business. The only way they're going to compete and grow is through M&A. And so now, if you think about like you had this like world of these 7 big strategics, right? Now there's all these mini strategics entering that space. And what's going to happen is that below those major strategic companies, there are already some other existing strategics, like mini strategics. Like for example, like iRhythm. iRhythm is in the cardiac arrhythmia space. They're a $5 billion company. You have SI Bone, which is a $3 billion company. Alpha Tech Spine, another $2-3 billion company. Well, now there's all these other new entrants into that pool, which is going to create a lot of competition at that level. And what's happening at the higher level is like things, companies that, again, not mentioned in the main strategic list I gave, but like GE Healthcare, Siemens, all 20, 30, $40 billion companies are now going to end up getting aggravated. So now they have to spend a much more active role, either investing in these companies, which is why you're seeing Siemens do a lot of these like partnerships and stuff, or buy them out. Like just recently, who was it? GE Healthcare just acquired Intelerad, which is essentially this like AI cloud enabled enterprise imaging platform, right? And so all this happening, the reason why this is a good thing is that we're headed in the right direction is because, sure, aside from exits becoming more of a thing, you had Lena Khan, who's the head of the FTC, stepping down. She was really big on like antitrust and everything, and so like M&A IPO markets sucked the last few years. So now all this stuff is happening. It also introduces a lot of access to capital for startups. So they don't have to just go to traditional venture capital. They can go to private investors. They can go get a corporate investment arm, right? Because now there's sort of a much better time horizon and multiple pathways for these companies to essentially either go IPO or get acquired beforehand, right? Versus before, like it was just really, really tough. And when you have an environment like that where, your only path to exit is an acquisition that might take like 7 to 10 years, like a lot of investors don't want to sign up for that, right?
What about from a cybersecurity perspective? I know it's like a subset of the state of MedTech. Do you think the state of MedTech in cybersecurity is improving at all, or are we getting worse?
Yeah, no, I think it's improving. So here's how I look at it. So I'll give you a little bit of historical context. So historically, you go back like 15, 20, 30 years ago, even, you can come up with a company that was going to have some like incremental improvement. Like let's use spine as a great example. So many different spine companies. They have like tiny incremental improvements on like one area, right? But then, you can do that and you can go and sell your company to like somebody, at Medtronic. They'll buy it, few $1 million, tens of $1 million, and you just do this over and over again. Well, now you can't just do that anymore, because now in order to attract capital, like you have to have like a pretty meaningful product that's going to make a meaningful difference and dent in the marketplace. And with that being introduced now, especially the last few years, everybody's trying to do some version of like AI enabled something. And if not AI enabled, like you have to have some digital aspect of it or data enabled. There's plenty of companies out there that make amazing medical device products that are going to get funded that are like dumb products. They're not digital or anything. But the vast majority of them need to have some kind of approach where it's like, hey, like we're going to have this data play, right? Or this digital capacity and everything. So in that introduces a lot of risk, right? And the only way to de-risk that is to have like a much better approach to the regulatory aspect, which is why cybersecurity has become so important. That's why I was very interested in engaging you guys, because it used to not be the most important thing, but the last few years, it's extremely important. And I think that when companies are looking to get acquired, you want to de-risk from day one all these different aspects. So you want to de-risk. So like what MarketCraft does, we help companies like position themselves from a messaging and a commercial standpoint. So you de-risk your chances. So that way, when you have to go to market or you talk to a strategic, you're able to show like, yeah, we actually have like a very active clinical pipeline. We have commercial traction, all these different things, right? You don't want to just wait to your commercial launch to do that. Same thing on the regulatory side. Like if a strategic buyer is looking to acquire you, but then they see that there's all kinds of cybersecurity risks and issues, like they're not going to touch that, because the last thing they want to do is acquire a company that didn't do things at least to a certain standard on the cybersecurity side, and then they acquire this asset and then I don't know, they get a warning letter from the FDA. Like that's not what they want happening.
Yeah, well, they typically don't get approved or not approved, but cleared by the FDA is what we've noticed. They kind of forget about
Right.
cybersecurity. What do you think, Trevor, about the industry and cybersecurity? And we obviously have a very biased lens because we look at only medical device cybersecurity.
No, but yeah, I'm wondering like from your guys' perspective, like how like risk wise, like kind of, you came on my show and talked about it, but walk us through like, okay, like what happens when you have a huge, you don't de-risk things on the cybersecurity. Like what's the ripple effect of that?
Well, I think one big example, which translates really well to this whole AI boom you were mentioning, everyone is AI something, digital something, which, is because of the new technology and people are trying to map the application of the technology to specific use cases. But it's also in many cases a marketing push trying to drive more funding. And this happened similarly around 2008 with the push of medical mobile applications right before those got regulated. Once everyone started using a smartphone, and the FDA started having to clamp down on manufacturers' use of mobile apps within a medical device, because it was the Wild West. You could do whatever you want. You could process any data on them with no control. And people were putting mobile apps on everything, largely as a marketing ploy in a lot of cases. We're seeing a similar situation where I think the regulators have learned a bit from their mistakes. They're being proactive with this. We saw the second AI started becoming prevalent in devices, the FDA pushed out draft AI cybersecurity and effective use guidance. Now, this isn't to say that these are actively enforced. It's still a little bit of the Wild West with AI. But I do think as a whole, cybersecurity is becoming a little bit more mature. I think it'll always be a bit of a gap since it tends to evolve faster than regulations can keep up with. But we're getting better. We're getting better in general. And just looking at the downstream, you mentioned strategics not wanting to get involved with startups that may not address their cybersecurity, but even stepping past that, we're seeing that the healthcare delivery organizations are concerned about cybersecurity practices, even down to insurance being concerned about cybersecurity practices, since there is such a high amount of liability that the hospital can take on if they are using a device that they have not proved is secure, or even for home use, the manufacturer's taking on such a massive amount of liability if that device gets hacked. It's becoming a really prevalent concern all the way left in the design process, and then in that go-to-market strategy, understanding how to get through some of these problems in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm happy you mentioned that. Like I was in the offices of iRhythm last week visiting with their CEO, Quentin Blackford. So iRhythm is essentially a digital health company, but I believe that they're becoming more of a predictive health company. They have um, a hardware that essentially goes on the chest, and it monitors arrhythmia for up to 14 days, compared to like usually if you have an arrhythmia, you're given this like weird like suitcase thing you carry for 24 hours, right? And so we were talking about the future of MedTech, and we both agreed that the future is going to be essentially that because of all the data, a payer will be able to flag somebody early on and say, oh, this person has increased risk of this disease or that disease. And then that patient will receive some package in the mail from their payer, from their insurance company saying, hey, like, because you have a high risk of this disease or this thing or that thing, you're going to wear this digital device just to monitor things. And then we're going to collect data on that, right? To figure out like what's some good proactive steps to take. And I think like once you start moving into the consumer home, which is really where a lot of MedTech is going, it's all a lot of MedTech, not a lot of it, but like a lot of investments starting to go to the front lines, which is primary care. And then beyond that, it's going into the consumer home because that's what people want. And once that happens, like you have to have like a lot more. And again, this is where I'm not knowledgeable, but I would imagine you have to have a much more solid cybersecurity strategy and approach than what we've normally been used to otherwise.
It was actually not too long ago, a very similar situation to what you're describing in automotive industry, where a couple of automotive manufacturers were tracking driving metrics as part of, cars are unfortunately getting smarter by the day, but they were tracking a bunch of metrics on how the driver is operating the car. They know who is driving which specific vehicle, and they were selling that information to insurance companies so that insurance companies could tailor quotes exactly to the way that driver drives. These automotive manufacturers ended up getting hit with a pretty big lawsuit for processing data like that. And there is, especially in the insurance space, the way that personal information is handled is a little bit of a gray area. And I think that the medtech industry does a better job of regulating that. We have HIPAA to provide overall guidance on how protected health information is, well, protected. And so I would hope that it's a little bit more well structured than some of these other situations, which we've seen come up in similar cases in the past. But yeah, I think that there are some more frameworks in place in general within the medtech space and within healthcare to prevent some of these nasty situations from coming up where possible.
I don't know about that because as you and I were at the health conference in Vegas, I don't know, like a couple months ago, Trevor, and we walked around. Was it a couple weeks ago?
That was like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, feels like
a lot
feels
happened
like
since
a
then.
lifetime ago. I've been to Singapore and I don't know where else since then. I have no idea. But there's a lot of new developments in technology with like a single drop of blood. They can make some predictions on diseases you'll have. And I'm pretty sure insurance companies are going to use this to their advantage. Because I got life insurance. I switched over to whole life insurance. I had to get this physical and do all this stuff. And they took my blood. But now they can do more tests against my blood to predict if I'm going to end up with some kind of disease. So it's, I don't know. It's like you said, it's a gray area, but I have a feeling like if you're predisposed to anything, you're probably not going to be able to get insurance anymore.
That may not be a bad thing to an extent. So here's what I'm seeing, and this is again like early data point on this, but like I was checking things out on X, and a lot of people are posting about this where essentially this guy, it started with this guy who's like, young entrepreneur, he's in good health, same with his family. It's a family of 4, and his thing was like, he's paying, I don't know, 20 grand or 30 grand a year on health insurance. And then for him to meet his premium, they're going to have like something crazy, like 20 grand in billings. And his thing is like, I don't know in what world we'll ever hit that, minus like, let's say a severe hospitalization. And so a lot of people, I think, are looking to just get maybe some version of like accidental insurance or something that's going to just protect you, like if you have a serious hospitalization. But then other than that, just go cash pay for everything. Like I've been talking to people that I know who, you know, make really good money and they do cash pay. I was talking to a founder who's a client of ours in MarketCraft, and you know, he's insured. He has a spouse that's a medical doctor, and he pays cash for his imaging and blood work because it's just cheaper that way. You know, so I think like the insurance setup that we currently have in this country, just we can't continue going on. And like a lot of our insurance is essentially subsidizing like old people, care for old people. Like it just, I don't think we can continue doing that forever.
No, that's a good point, because I'm just like doing the math between Melissa and I, we have health insurance. It costs us about $30,000 a year for the best insurance we can get. So over the last 2 years, have we had $60,000 worth of hospital visits? No, I haven't been to the hospital one time.
Right.
So that's a good point. If you think about over time and the number of times you go to the hospital, it's probably better just to pay cash. Plus, if you pay cash, it's usually a lot less.
It's a lot low. It's a lot less. And then, you know, the other side of it, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just talking about this out loud because you know, my wife, we're on her insurance plan, and I just like went along with it because I didn't have enough information to make the decision right now. But, you know, but I was even thinking, I'm like, okay, like instead of us paying, you know, I think we're paying like $1,500 or $2,000 a month. I was like, why don't I just like put that money automatically into an, you know, HSA account that grows, that can be used and leveraged in a variety of different ways. And then if anything happens, like over a period of 2 years, like, you know, we'll have tens of thousands of dollars in our HSA account if they need to be used. And then like worst case scenario, if there's a hospitalization that happens, and again, what's sad is that most people are in this country are literally one bad hospital visit away from bankruptcy.
Right.
But I feel if you get hospitalized and like you can figure out some kind of payment plan you can get on, I just feel like there's options, you know?
I think seeing a little bit of a shift overall in the insurance process, like dental insurance, for an example, where you're planning out specific procedures at specific intervals, or, you know, anything crazy that would come up that deviate away from that healthcare insurance practice of being a shared risk pool. Since, like you said earlier, we are ultimately subsidizing people who are unluckier or have worse predispositions for health outcomes than we do. And that's just, you know, unfortunately the nature of the way that a shared risk pool like that would work. So I think a shift more towards something where you're planning out these at specific intervals. I don't think dental insurance is generally a good case to, you know, use if you don't have it as a benefit of something else, but something more similar in that approach might be a bit more of a middle ground to take.
Yeah. No,
I don't plan on ever going to the dentist. I don't know why I would need dental insurance. These planned things you're talking about. Yeah.
You're supposed to go to the dentist once in a while.
I still have that hole in my filling when it fell out. I'm not going. I was traumatized last time, so I'm not going back.
I don't believe that is traumatizing. We don't have dental insurance. We go twice a year now for cleaning. You know, we just do cash pay and we're done.
I try to structure dentist visits for being in China or Japan or Europe or somewhere. It's, you know, $50 to go get a cleaning instead of whatever outrageous price. I haven't been to the dentist since I moved to San Francisco, and I'm terrified of when the day comes. But luckily, I have a trip coming up to Canada next month, so I'll just go get my cleaning there.
That's an interesting point, because I know people that go to Turkey for like, you know, breast augmentation. Or
hair transplant. That's
hair transplant too.
The world. Yeah, my people they crush it when it comes to hair transplants.
Really?
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. That's why when you land in Istanbul, there's all these dudes walking around with like bloody bandages on their heads because they want their you can get like a high.
They took their hair out and put it in somebody else's.
No. A hair transplant, the way it works, so the side of your hair. Do you look? Just a sidebar. Do you love how big of a tangent we just went on? This is great. This is why I knew this was going to be a lot of fun. I scheduled this during Thanksgiving because I'm like we're going to go on all kinds of tangents on this one. Okay, so the way hair works for men is that the side of your hair and the back of your head, for whatever reason, is for the most part resistant to testosterone, which is what causes hair to fall out. And so when they do a hair transplant, they will remove hair follicles from the back of your head and just it's like it's like replanting a tree. They transplant it to the front and it grows.
So
I
the
have a
hair
hair
here
transplant.
is resistant to testosterone on the side.
Yeah.
So if I
Which is
move
why you
it,
don't,
it remains resistant? Is that the theory?
it remains resistant. They don't know why. They don't know why.
I never
But
knew
this
that.
is why also you don't get a hair transplant under the age of 30, because like you can continue losing hair and now you have like a really good hairline, but you've lost all your hair, you know? But believe it or not, I had a hair transplant. I worked at a robotic company that did robotic hair transplants. And then when I was laid off, I went and got a free hair transplant before I left the company. So
Like a robot did the hair transplant?
yeah, robot. Yeah. Restoration Robotics. They're now owned by Venus, which is a aesthetic company. Yeah, probably one of the most like impressive computer visualization systems of any robotic system out there.
So not
Yeah.
a human wasn't involved. It's just all robotic.
I mean, there was a human involved. The robot did the harvesting, and then a human went and did the implantation.
Okay, interesting. Huh.
I
I'm
know.
trying to get
I wonder if
ahead
that
of it.
robot was secure
I'm-
from hacking. It could harvest the wrong hair, I guess.
You guys both have good. You guys both have good hairlines. You don't. Neither of you need a hair transplant.
I'm trying to get ahead of it. When it does go, not much is going to go. So not too much will change
I
there.
think you're good, man. Yeah, Trevor, you're good. Cybersecurity issues on that robot. I mean, stores patient data. It's digital.
I guess that's
So-
true. Well, we've done in similar areas like medical spas for acne treatment. There's devices that have high-powered lasers with a cooling mechanism, and we've tested some of those in the aesthetics industry that have had problems. I know Trevor did one of the tests on those, right? We could turn up the laser and turn off the cooling and really like severely burn somebody's face.
Yeah, this is another really, really cool technology. It would alternate really quickly between super hot laser and then, super cool cooling to prevent too much damage to the skin while still treating acne. But yeah, we were able to, during our penetration testing, just shut off that cooling safeguard altogether. And so it was just really hot laser all the time. And so I'm picturing, usually when we get that level of access to a medical device, it's keys to the kingdom. We can change whatever it's doing in whatever way we want. And so we can say, well, we're moving the hair transplant from here onto the forehead at that point. You're able to make a lot of control when you have that much power over the medical device. But yeah, even outside of, admittedly, a little bit of a silly situation to say a hacker's going to go hack into the robot and transplant hair in the wrong place. Understanding when you move that to a surgical robot, now you can understand where the use cases become really, really severe for similar applications.
Well, I got an interesting cybersecurity question for you guys. Is that what's an example of some medical devices that you would not like the average person or average like MedTech professional wouldn't think it needs cybersecurity, a cybersecurity strategy for, but it actually does. So like something that's AI enabled, heavy on data. Those are the kind of obvious ones. What are some ones that are like not so obvious?
The continuous glucose monitor patches, like the little Dexcom patches, things like that. Those are considered cyber devices. They're passing data transfers to another system that you don't control, to a mobile phone usually. But even just those little stickers, you were talking about iRhythm earlier. It's a similar use case where there's just a small sticker running a little bit of embedded code or something on a microcontroller. Put it in there, but that's processing data. That's processing information. A really interesting one too that we can talk about is, per the FDA's definition, magnetic coils such as the ones used in your passport or the ones used in credit cards. If you have those enabled on a medical device and you are running validated software that could be vulnerable to some type of attack, that is considered a cyber device. So something that can read in a credit card, but it has no data interface, does not process any health information, does not make any treatment, that is considered a cyber device. Well, as long as it's used within the medical context. But yeah, I always think that magnetic coil example is one of the biggest gotchas the FDA has out there.
I like
That's
the
interesting.
drug
I did not know
infusion
that.
pump example.
Yeah,
Because
drug infusion
I
pumps
visited
can be
my
really nice.
cousin like a year ago in the hospital, and from being a hacker or used to be a hacker, you have all these devices. Like I think there's an average of like 14 medical devices per hospital bed, and they've all got these USB ports. They've all running Bluetooth, and I think some of those were actually vulnerable devices. I didn't test. I know my wife's father-in-law, he has a defibrillator, and I tested to see if I connect to it via Bluetooth. I was scanning for it, but I couldn't. It might be using med radio or something. But it's always good for me. It's kind of scary. Like, what if I actually connected to his defibrillator and pressed the, was able to do something? I could shock him or something.
Interesting. I did not realize that. Wow.
Well, the drug infusion pumps, there's a famous hacker that was able to prove that those were compromisable in a way where he could kill a patient by increasing the flow rate of a drug such as morphine.
Oh, that makes sense.
So the patient would OD. Yeah.
Like what? Okay, give me the like really nefarious bad. Like if you were a hacker and you got access to somebody's like CGM data, like what could they possibly do?
What they could do and what actually happens are a little bit of different stories. So generally, hackers look for the lowest hanging fruit. They're in it to make money. Whatever is the most vulnerable device with the most sensitive information. Boom, grab it, take it, and run. With the CGM, and this is a more targeted scenario, and it is still a potential risk, but just to add some context on, this isn't a normal use case. Someone can read in, if they can compromise any device, you can usually manipulate what that device says. And so a CGM, if it's outside the body, generally going to communicate over Bluetooth or oftentimes over NFC, similar to a credit card. And if you're picking up that information and you can control that CGM, you can control what that information says. You can create your own glucose readings to say whatever you want. And especially when, diabetics generally rely on insulin, and insulin needs to be very carefully dosed since it's not great for you to have too much or too little. And if you have it when you're not diabetic, there can be a slew of problems that come in there. So you can modify the results of a CGM where your insulin dosage or your treatment therapy, your treatment plan from your healthcare provider is altered as a result of those readings to introduce risk to yourself.
The whole CGM thing is interesting to me because I met this innovator that has a CGM that's implantable, that you can charge it wirelessly and you can get the readings off of it. And he said that he doesn't think he'll ever be able to sell it because there's no consumable. So we're talking about, the industry. So it's like the razor blade example. You buy the razor, but the blades are the consumable. It's kind of the same thing with CGMs. Even though this is an awesome invention, he's afraid that he'll never be able to sell it. And I'm sure, Omar, you've had
revenue, man.
You've had
software.
People. What's that?
I said software, monthly recurring revenue. And I feel like
from an industry perspective, though, this is something that is much more convenient for the patient. But just because we can't make revenue, it's not going to fly, is what we're saying.
Well, you could do an inverse of what Dexcom does, where Dexcom sells the device and then you get the software to go with it. You just flip that around.
That's what that's. And by the way, this is also why I think iRhythm. By the way, this is not financial advice. I'm just a dude on the internet who likes MedTech. But this is why I'm very interested in following iRhythm's journey, because the current CEO of iRhythm was the COO of Dexcom. So, but I feel like along with innovation, we also have to have business model innovation. And so I don't know, if you're selling like an implantable CGM, the monthly recurring is a software, and I don't know, that's kind of a hard switching cost, because imagine you're in a switch, you have to get this thing, this implant removed, versus you just kind of continue with the same company because it's already in you. I don't know. I feel like I think there's opportunities for business model innovation. Honestly, I think the razor blade model is kind of outdated, and
even
intuitive, huh?
Even in MedTech with the consumables.
Well, because hospitals aren't stupid, and so that's there are companies now that are trying to find options for leasing capital equipment, or just doing very hospitals aren't dumb. They have really savvy business people and data people running them now, and so if they're looking at a product to acquire, they're going to do the math of what's it going to cost over the long run, and so I think the consumable side sure, it's good if you have it, but I think that there's opportunity to do other really interesting things. I mean, software is one of those things. Sure, maybe you don't have consumable revenue, but you're also not carrying inventory, right? And so that kind of changes that side of the equation. I don't know. I just think there's plenty of room for really unique business models to be tested with. Digital health is going to have to do that because they don't have consumable.
Well, that's a good point. We have to change the business model. I feel like one of the constraints is what the insurance is willing to pay for from a reimbursement perspective. Until that is able to catch up, we're always like have to go back to like kind of lowest common denominator, because people, we talked about insurance earlier. If the insurance won't pay for something, then they may not be able to get a procedure. Unless they switch to the model that you and I are talking about, which is shove the money into a bank account and don't even pay for insurance. But if you're working for an employer, the employer often pays for your health insurance.
Yeah. And you have these like really large employer-based like insurances, right? Like Walmart and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I think again, like if they're, Josh Mackauer, who's the Stanford professor, head of biodesign, was on my show a while back and talking about how a big problem we have is sort of this lack of transparency between innovation and the payer, because a lot of times the payer isn't like that transparent as to what they're going to cover and what they're not. And so that's why like a lot of med device companies, they, it's a big deal for them to get, let's say, FDA breakthrough designation, and then like later on if they get like a code, a reimbursement code for something, like renal denervation renal denervation, that's an interesting one. Okay, so get this. Renal denervation had like its moment of, many years back, kind of went away. It's making this big resurgence now. Medtronic is really looking hard into it. Right now, it's like a $60-70 million market. So it's not big, but it's growing at a 17.8% CAGR. 17.8. To put that in perspective, cardiovascular devices is like a $70 billion market, and it's like super exciting because it's growing at a 6% CAGR. So like this other thing is growing at 17%. So it'll be a multi-billion-dollar market soon, And part of the reason why that happened is because CMS came out with codes specifically for renal denervation, So there's something that needs to be done on the sort of reimbursement side in terms of the transparency and, more importantly, like how that drives innovation. Because like if it's not transparent how people are going to get paid, it's very difficult to sort of not only innovate, but like, part of what MedTech needs is like, and I'm going to write an article about this. I feel like we need a bubble. We need our own bubble. Bubbles are historically looked at as like negative things, but if you think about it, like every bubble laid the foundation for like really big moonshot innovations to happen. Like the .com bubble.
What do you mean a new bubble? What does that mean?
Like we need a bubble, like a bunch of money flowing in to fund all
like
kinds
the stock
of projects.
Market bubble before
yeah,
it burst?
like right now there's an AI bubble happening right now, like a massive AI bubble. But everyone knows about the negative side effects of the bubbles. The positive side effects is that like it funds like really big moonshot projects and also lays the foundation for things that we're not aware of. So for example, during the .com, I mean like I'll give you an example of, it was kind of a bubble, but like this is an example of what happens when like a bunch of money goes into innovation. When we decided to like fund the Apollo program, like so much money went into it, and it like spun out so many different pieces of innovation because we just didn't know, like, how do we make zero gravity food, for example. If you look at the .com bubble, one of the byproducts of that was like all these like fiber optic companies and cables and everything, right? Well, that technically laid the foundation for like companies like YouTube and streaming and Netflix, like all kind of take off because that was laid as foundation. But they didn't do that with that in mind, right? And so I feel like we need to have some level of a bubble in MedTech where a bunch of capital and funding starts coming in. And then that allows for this sort of like market experiment of a lot of different companies and moonshot projects to kind of like actually have a chance. If you don't have that amount of capital, this is why, like, for historical reasons, we've had only like these like incremental improvements in MedTech. There, like we haven't had this like big moonshot thing where like, oh my God, this is insane, right? Neuralink is an example of that, but that's because it's funded by like one of the richest men on planet Earth, right. So like we need more stuff like that,
I think we're kind of in the opposite of a bubble. A lot of the investors I talk to that used to invest in like 12 different companies and kind of roll the dice are now picking one and being very much more risk averse.
Yeah, and it's bad. And there's a reason for that. There's a big historical reason for that, in terms of why this risk aversion sort of has happened over time, right? And like I'll give you, this is like a much deeper, long conversation, but I have to give a shout out. I have to give credit where credit's due. Like one of the reasons why I've like have this like random knowledge, Stripe Press, which is part of Stripe, who prints like money like nothing. They publish really amazing books. One of the books they just published is this one called, it's by Hobart and Huber, called Bubbles and the End of Stagnation. It's called Boom. So it's all about bubbles. But like overall, like as a society, we become more and more risk averse, right? Which is not a good thing, you know? And
You think the society as a whole has become more risk averse? Because I'm
yes,
very, I mean, I just drove a car as fast as I could drive in Vegas and jumped off the stratosphere, and I saw
that's
the
an
Wizard
N
of
of one,
Oz.
though.
Huh?
An N of one, you know? You know, if you look at okay, like if you look at academia, even like a lot of academic papers that are being published are kind of all more or less the same, and that's partly because they're trying to just get grants to get funded for something, you know, and not just grants, but they also want to get referenced. And so if you publish a paper that's on like this completely like blue ocean new area, you're not going to get referenced a lot. And part of like success as a researcher is like, well, how many times was your paper cited and referenced? You know, so like that's like one tiny example. There's all these other things that are happening in society that have caused us to become a lot more risk averse. Look, I'll give you another example.
We have to fix that. That's a problem.
Of course, yeah, totally. No, totally. And that's part of the thing that I'm trying to do with my show is to bring more awareness to MedTech and like attract like the right mindset, you know, to look, we have a talent problem in MedTech. So we have a capital problem is one, but I think that's going to resolve itself because healthcare is like, there's a zeitgeist happening where everybody's becoming more and more interested in their health and healthcare. So that's going to have like a trickle down effect to medtech, biotech, all these different areas.
Right.
We also have a talent issue. The smartest people in the Valley, Trevor's in the Valley, the smartest people are not going into medtech. They're going into like crypto projects. They're going into social media, tech. And so we need to do a better job as an industry marketing ourselves. Not only that you can do really cool stuff in this industry, but you can make a lot of money. You know, there's a reason why on my show, I go out of my way to promote the hell out of somebody like Ray Cohen, who's made like boatloads of money, right? But also at the same time has had tremendous impact on patients. Mm-hmm. You know, you can do both those things, you know? So
I think there's a little bit of a misconception, Bay Area especially, where you mentioned crypto. Of course, AI is the big thing. I mean, I can barely get out the front door of my apartment without hearing someone talk about their AI startup. But people are printing money in these startups. They are getting funding seemingly out of nowhere. And it's not as slow. I think the capital problem is part of the talent shortage. People realize I can make a quick buck in AI like that. I can't do that in medtech.
And I guess like, yeah, and I don't have the answer for that about how we fix that. But no, you're right. I mean, look, if you look at like A16Z or Sequoia or any of these large funds, it's like, if it's AI based, like write a $2 to $5 million check at like a $50 million valuation and write as many of these things as possible, because one of these things will go to the moon and essentially you can write off everything else from the gains of this one investment, right? So like we need to manufacture something like that in medtech. Like there might be a bubble in renal denervation if there's a bunch of startups that get going in that area, right? But I don't know. We have to solve for this somehow because it's going to be a problem. Like we can't, you know, okay, I'm 39. I can't point to the next big names in like the medtech startup ecosystem that are my age or younger, because there's not a lot of like, you know, there's not a lot of founders, medtech founders that are under the age of, you know, 30, right? I think I can think of like 2 or 3.
That's an interesting perspective.
I don't know if I know anyone.
Really? I guess a lot of them are like doctors that have kind of retired from being a doctor and decided to do something different. So they're always like in their mid 50s typically.
There's got to be, and again, these are part of like larger macro issues. I don't have an answer, but like, you know, I'll give you an example, like on the capital side. So somebody wants to invest in a startup, they have to be an accredited investor, meaning that they have a net worth of $1 million, or they make more than, I think, 250 grand 3 years in a row. Okay. So there's all these rules for somebody wanting to invest in a company, but at the same time, they can go on like DraftKings and place bets on the dumbest things possible, like whether somebody's going to do like a dance in the end zone or not. Or they can go on something like Polymarket, which, by the way, I like Polymarket. I think it's a really cool platform. But they can go on Polymarket and bet like, will like XYZ politician be arrested by this date, right? Like, so as a society, like we allow for like risk-taking behaviors and all these like things that are completely meaningless. But then when it comes to things like investing in startups, like, oh no, we want you to be like really well informed and you have to be accredited and everything. And I think we have to figure out a way to sort of change those regulations. People are going to get burned, but like I think.
So you're saying the average person that can go put a couple $100 on a blackjack table in Vegas should be able to also put that couple $100 into a MedTech innovator and invest in them if they want to.
Yeah,
and not have to be an accredited investor.
Yeah, because like I think if you have that option, people aren't stupid. Like you're gonna have some people who are just gonna throw money at something because, like, I don't know, it was being hyped up on Reddit. But at the same time, people are going to take it upon themselves to get like, to essentially get a little bit more educated on the process, on the due diligence, etc. I think startups who raise money, like I worked in the equity crowdfunding space just for like a short bit, but like those startups like really go out of their way to really educate people who are investing in that startup, the process, how they're going to get a return, all these different things. So I think it's possible. I mean, like, look, I think sports gambling is one of the worst things that's happening right now in America that nobody really talks about. Like if you look at the Super Bowl last year, almost 50% of men ages 18 to 25 bet something on the Super Bowl. Like almost 50%.
Wow.
Like that's like, think about how much money that is.
Well, cool. Well, we're coming up here on time, so I usually like to.
On that note,
hey, I just got back from Vegas, and I did some gambling on roulette and blackjack. But I ended up like positive every time. I'm not one of those people that I quit when I'm ahead. I don't just keep trying to win more and more and more.
I don't know. Last time I was in Vegas,
Christian, you're the kind of guy.
Lost it.
Christian, I was gonna say, you're the kind of guy I feel like is gonna go to a casino and then you're gonna get banned because like you found a way to like, beat the house, and they're just like, we got to ban this guy.
I tried that with Trevor once because he's like the brain box people like to say. He's like super smart, and he told me there's no way he can lose money on blackjack, that he can count the cards basically. So I took out $1,000, gave the Trevor. Guess what? It was gone in like 3 minutes. I'm like,
it was $200, but it was gone within 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, all right, Trevor, that didn't work out too well. Read some books on blackjack or something.
See, wouldn't you guys have felt better if it's like, hey, let's just put it on this random startup? Problem is that, like, again, time horizons and stuff, but I don't know, like,
it's not the instant gratification.
Like it would be like, I think it'd be, again, I don't know legally how you do this and everything, but like, I think it'd be like super interesting if there was like some kind of a second, like, you can put money into a startup, but then there's a very easy and direct way to sell it on like a secondary market or something, that if you wanted to. That'd be
interesting. Yeah. You can sell your shares, but they're really not shares because it's not really, yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Well, no, awesome. Let's go around. I usually go around at the end of our episode for some parting words or last minute words of wisdom. So we'll start with Trevor and then we'll go to Omar.
I'm going to say for this one, start with the end in mind. I think a general tech problem is I invented this problem and then I invented a solution for it. Actually understand the problem, understand your market fit, start with your reimbursement, start with how much is this going to cost? How are we getting paid back? How are people paying for this? How are we dealing with regulations? Even, we talk about reimbursement codes for insurance. Is there a product code within the FDA's classification of devices? Start with these things before you dive headfirst into the product.
I'm gonna try and keep this concise, but I'm gonna share my thought process on this from something I read earlier today. So I came across this quote earlier today. So this is not my parting words of advice. Okay, the quote came from Seneca, and the quote is: "The body should be treated more rigorously so that it may not be disobedient to the mind." I really like that quote, and it made me start thinking about like parallels or things in life, right? And so I was like, to build muscle, you have to tear muscle, right? Like that's essentially when you go weightlifting and everything, you're essentially tearing muscle. And the process of tearing muscle allows it to be built up. And I was like, why would it be any different when it comes to, let's say, your character or your mind or your spirit? So for a lot of like small business owners or entrepreneurs who are out there, just think of it like that like you're going through, the perils of hell right now before you get to the gates of heaven for a reason, right? Like, just like
you're advocating we practice Stoicism. Is that what we're talking about, basically?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, Stoicism, but like reframing. Like I'll give you shout out to my mentor from afar, my Uncle Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert. He wrote a great book called Reframing the Mind. But think of it like this: if you're listening to this episode and something really lousy happened to you, the reframe is that, oh, now that this lousy thing happened to me, the universe kind of owes me. And like really believe that.
Yeah.
Right? It'll change your day. It's like the most important thing that you should understand is the story that you have in your head.
It's the one that matters the most. Cool. Well, I think my parting words here, I usually say what Trevor says, but he stole mine. I haven't gone with the Stoicism thing yet from Seneca, but I think one of the themes here is like, we're saying MedTech is not sexy enough for young entrepreneurs to get into. That's kind of what we're saying, right? Wasn't that what you were saying earlier, Omar? Like, there's not they'd rather go to crypto or AI in Silicon Valley than join MedTech, but the impact is much greater in MedTech, actually.
100%. And I think it is sexy. We just don't do a good job of marketing it. I mean, look, dude, like MedTech is a big space. I'm the biggest guy in our entire industry on X. That should not like that's
you're the biggest guy. Like, how many followers do you have on X?
Like 8,000. Like not much, so like that should change. Like, sometimes like I'll talk to these like CEOs of public companies and they're like, oh, I don't want to be I'm like, it's not about you. Like, you think I want to be on TikTok? No. But I literally, part of my like marketing budget goes towards like us like putting content on TikTok, because I'm like, I have to find more ways to reach the audience so that they like find this content, they get into it. Like there's gonna be somebody who's like really big into cybersecurity, and I think that like your show will do a big service to attract people who want to go into cybersecurity and be like, yeah, there's like, military, there's this, there's that, like, but like MedTech cybersecurity, like that's actually pretty cool. There's
only one company for that, and that's Blue Goat Cyber.
There you go. Unless you go be a CISO at a major company and then you use Blue Goat Cyber, that's the other option.
That's the other option. There's only two options. Well, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Hope you enjoyed this episode and found some value and maybe a little bit of humor. And we hope to see you in the next one.